Alien, Blade Runner, 2001, the original Star Wars trilogy, masterpieces, all of them. I will defend every single one. And I'm going to argue that modern sci-fi beats them, not because they're bad, because we know more now, because the tools are better, because storytelling has been freed from constraints that the classics couldn't escape. I know that's a fight worth having, so let's have it. 3 specific counts. By the end of this video, I think you'll at least understand the argument, even if you push back hard in the comments. Let's get into it. The first count is the most obvious one, and it's worth saying clearly even though it feels almost too easy. Modern sci-fi looks incomparably better, and that matters more than people admit. Go back and watch Alien. Not just watch it, really look at it. The story is extraordinary, the atmosphere is suffocating, the creature design is still genuinely unsettling decades later. Ridley Scott built something that spawned an entire franchise and permanently changed what horror science fiction could be. And the Nostromo's computer screens are green text on black monitors that look exactly like what they are. 1979. Office terminals with a thin coat of science fiction paint. Now look at Blade Runner, made by the same director just 3 years later in 1982. Another masterpiece, another extraordinary leap of imagination, a film that invented the visual language of cyberpunk and influenced everything that came after it. Deckard makes a video call from a public booth in a bar, the future of telecommunications, depicted on a CRT screen with chunky green digits dialing the number. A dedicated booth in a public place, because in 1982 that was the only way to imagine video calling being accessible to ordinary people. The reality? Video calling arrived. But it didn't need a booth. It didn't need a bar. It didn't need anything except the smartphone that billions of people now carry in their pocket. People make video calls walking down the street, sitting on the bus, standing in a supermarket queue. A technology that looked like an extraordinary futuristic luxury in 1982 is now so mundane that nobody gives it a second thought. The future arrived. It just looked completely different from how even the most visionary filmmakers imagined it. And the Esper machine, the extraordinary device that lets Deckard navigate inside a photograph in 3 dimensions, using voice commands, genuinely visionary technology, even by today's standards, was housed in what the production designers deliberately made look like worn-out surplus office equipment. A retrofitted piece of furniture that wouldn't have looked out of place in a 1982 police station. 2 films, both genuine masterpieces, both imagining extraordinary futures, both visually anchored in the technology of their present in ways their creators couldn't escape. Now, is that Ridley Scott's fault? Absolutely not. He was imagining the future from where he stood, with the tools he had and the visual language available to him. Nobody in 1979 or 1982 could have imagined what computer interfaces would actually look like 40 years later. The speculation was bounded by the present in ways the filmmaker couldn't escape, and this is the key point. It's not just about the visuals dating badly. It's about what the technology of an era allows filmmakers to imagine and depict. Modern sci-fi was made by people who grew up with the internet, who have seen what actual space looks like from actual probes sent to actual planets, who live with smartphones and voice interfaces and machine learning. The future they imagine is built on a completely different foundation of lived technological experience. When the Expanse depicts a spaceship interior, it looks like a spaceship interior that someone who understood engineering actually designed. When Interstellar shows a black hole, it was calculated by actual physicists and produced the first scientifically accurate visualization of a black hole that had ever appeared in popular culture. A visualization that was close enough to what we later observed that the scientists working on it published a paper about it. The classics imagined boldly. Modern sci-fi imagines with more information, and both the boldness and the information matter. The second count is scientific literacy. And this is where modern sci-fi has made its most significant leap. The classics were scientifically imaginative, but often scientifically loose. Which was fine. The point was never a physics lecture. The point was story and wonder and the feeling of vastness. But the best modern science fiction has found a way to be both, scientifically grounded and emotionally overwhelming. Take Arrival. On the surface, aliens land, humanity panics, a linguist is brought in to communicate with them, straightforward enough. But at its core, Arrival is a film about the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, the idea that the language you think in shapes the way you experience reality. It takes a genuine and genuinely contested idea from linguistics and uses it as the engine of the entire story. The science is not decoration. The science is the plot. Take The Expanse, a solar system colonized by humans, with Earth, Mars, and the asteroid belt in complex political tension. The physics of space travel are treated with a seriousness that almost no previous sci-fi had attempted. There is no sound in space. Thrust gravity works exactly as it should. The human body reacts to long-term space habitation in ways that are biologically realistic. The Expanse is not a perfect scientific document, no dramatic sci-fi can be, but it is a serious attempt to imagine what humanity in space would actually look like, built on what we actually know. Take Annihilation, a film so scientifically strange, drawing on ideas from evolutionary biology, cellular mutation, and the philosophy of identity, that many viewers found it genuinely disorienting, not because it was confusing, because it was asking questions from real science that have no comfortable answers. The classics gave us the wonder of what might be out there. The best modern sci-fi gives us the wonder and then makes us think harder about it. The third count is the one I find most interesting, and it requires a little context to make properly. Modern sci-fi is narratively freer than the classics, and the classics aren't lesser for it. They were working within the storytelling grammar of their era. Think about what film and television expected of stories in the 1970s and 1980s. 3 acts, rise in tension, a climax, a resolution. Good versus evil with a winner. The hero survives, the monster dies, the day is saved. This wasn't laziness. This wasn't a failure of imagination. This was the established language of storytelling, the structure audiences had been trained to expect, and studios had been trained to deliver. Breaking it was possible, but risky, and rarely rewarded. Alien ends, with Ripley surviving and the alien defeated. Star Wars ends with the Death Star destroyed and the heroes triumphant. Blade Runner, one of the more ambiguous classics, still gives you a chase, a confrontation, a resolution of sorts. These are satisfying endings. They work, they earn their place in the canon, but they are endings shaped by the era that produced them. The form imposed the closure. Modern storytelling has evolved. Prestige television, the long-form narrative arc, the season-long slow burn, the streaming era that freed creators from weekly ratings pressure, has genuinely changed what audiences expect and what creators are allowed to do. Ambiguity is now a valid ending. The unresolved question is now a legitimate artistic destination. The hero doesn't have to win. Good doesn't have to triumph. The monster doesn't have to die. Some things are allowed to stay broken. Look at Annihilation. It ends without explaining itself. Deliberately, defiantly, and it is a more powerful film for it. Look at Arrival. The ending reframes everything that came before it, not as resolution, but as acceptance. It doesn't answer the question of whether the choice was right. It simply shows you someone making it. Look at Andor, 12 episodes of a Star Wars story, part of the most commercially successful franchise in history, that spent more time in a prison work camp exploring what resistance actually costs than in any space battle. That trusted its audience to sit with moral compromise, with complicity, with the weight of what it means to fight a system from inside it. And look at Continuum, a Canadian series that took a seemingly straightforward premise. A cop from 2077 accidentally travels back to 2012 with a group of terrorists and turned it into something genuinely unsettling. Because the longer you watch, the more you realise that the protagonist is not straightforwardly the hero. The future she is trying to protect is a corporate dystopia. The terrorists she is chasing are, depending on your perspective, freedom fighters. Continuum trusted its audience to hold that moral ambiguity for 4 seasons without resolving it cleanly. The classics would have picked a side in episode 1. That would not have been made in 1979, not because the talent wasn't there, because the storytelling environment wasn't there to receive it. Now, I want to be honest about the other side of this argument, because intellectual honesty is what this channel is built on. For every Arrival, there are 10 forgettable streaming sci-fi productions that use the aesthetic of serious science fiction without any of the substance. For every Andor, there is a sequel that exists purely to extend a franchise's commercial life. Modern sci-fi at its worst is worse than the classics at their worst, because modern production budgets and streaming economics have industrialized mediocrity at a scale the classics never had to contend with. There is simply more bad sci-fi being made now than ever before, and there are things the classics did that modern sci-fi rarely matches. A certain rawness, a practical physicality, real sets, real models, real light, that computer-generated imagery still hasn't fully replaced. The original Alien feels real in a way that many modern productions, for all their technical sophistication, don't quite manage. The classics earn their place, they deserve their reputation, but here is where I land. When I compare the best of and then with the best of now, Alien with Arrival, Star Wars with Andor, 2001 with The Expanse, the best of now is doing more scientifically grounded, more visually accurate, more narratively ambitious, more willing to be uncomfortable, unresolved, and genuinely challenging. Not because the people who made the classics were less talented, but because modern creators stand on the shoulders of everything that came before them, with more knowledge, better tools, and a storytelling environment that gives them more freedom to use both. The classics built the foundation. Modern sci-fi is what you can build when you have a foundation to stand on. Next time, I want to make a case that some of you will agree with immediately and some of you will push back on hard. Battlestar Galactica, the reboot, not the 1970s original, is one of the greatest television series ever made. Not just the greatest sci-fi series, one of the greatest of any genre. Full stop. And I want to talk about why the ending nearly undid all of it. If you're tired of sci-fi content that doesn't take the genre seriously, hit like, it helps. Subscribe and join the conversation. New video every week. Out there is exactly where we're going.